Hey everyone, so today we're going to talk about a sliver of water that is so ridiculously important to the global economy that if something went wrong there, well, it could affect pretty much all of us. And yet, most people probably couldn't find it on a map. We are talking about the Strait of Hormuz.
And that brings us to the big question, right? It sounds a little over the top, but could a little waterway, just 21 miles wide, actually trigger a worldwide economic crisis? The short answer is a huge, resounding yes.
So why? What makes it so special? It really all boils down to this one number, 20%. Just think about that. One-fifth. One-fifth of the entire world's daily oil supply funnels through this single spot. It's not an exaggeration to call it the world's most critical oil artery.
So let's get our bearings. Geographically, the Strait of Hormuz is the only way for ships to get from the Gulf out into the open ocean. It's squeezed right between Iran to the north and Oman to the south. And believe me, that location is everything. It makes it one of the most strategic and tense places on Earth.
This unique geography is exactly what makes it the ultimate choke point. You know, the physical limits of this place are precisely what gives it so much power over the entire global market.
And you really got to understand the scale here. The strait itself is about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, which sounds like a lot. But the actual shipping lanes, the deep channels that these massive supertankers have to use, are only 2 miles wide in each direction. That is an incredibly tight squeeze with very, very little room for error.
And who's relying on this tiny path? Oh, just a who's who of global energy superpowers. We're talking Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Iraq, and yeah, even Iran itself. And get this, Qatar, which is the world's #1 exporter of liquefied natural gas, that's natural gas that's been super chilled into a liquid so it's easier to ship, sends almost all of its exports right through here. Okay, so this leads us perfectly into our next thought. High stakes, narrow passage. Let's actually put some real numbers on the sheer amount of stuff and the value of that stuff that's at risk here every single day. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, the daily flow is, well, it's a staggering 21 million barrels of oil. Let that sink in. That's not per week or per month. That is the volume passing through the strait every single day. So what does that river of oil actually translate to in dollars? Well, over the course of a year, you're looking at something like $600 billion worth of energy trade. That is a colossal, mind-boggling amount of money that completely depends on safe passage through this one little waterway. And this right here shows you where it's all going. Now you might think, oh, it's a Middle Eastern strait, it's a Middle Eastern problem. Nope. The main customer, by a long shot, is Asia. We're talking over 80% of the crude oil. Countries like China, Japan, India, South Korea, their economies are massively dependent on this one route. A problem here sends economic shockwaves across the entire planet.
Which, of course, brings us to the elephant in the room. The central geopolitical issue here, the Iran factor. Iran's unique position right on the edge of the strait gives it enormous leverage, and that has shaped politics in the region and the world for decades.
You know, this quote from an analyst really just hits the nail on the head. Iran's power on the world stage isn't just about its own oil. It's about its potential ability to essentially turn off the tap for all of its neighbors who also rely on the Gulf. That's a huge strategic card to hold.
And look, this tension is nothing new. Not at all. The strait has been a flashpoint for decades. You had the tanker war back in the 80s, all the way up to more recent attacks on tankers and seizures of ships. This narrow strip of water has a very long and very tense history.
So how could a closure actually happen? Well, analysts point to a whole range of tools that Iran has at its disposal. We're talking about laying sea mines, using swarms of super-fast attack boats, deploying submarines and drones, or even firing sophisticated anti-ship missiles from the land. Any one of those things could make passing through the strait incredibly dangerous.
So that brings us to our final and maybe most important section. What would a world without a functioning Strait of Hormuz actually look like? Well, the scenarios are pretty grim.
The most immediate thing you and I would feel would be pain at the gas pump. A serious disruption could easily send oil prices soaring from, say, $70 a barrel to well over $100. And for every single person and every business out there, that means higher costs for everything. It could absolutely trigger a global economic downturn.
But okay, what about going around it? Aren't there pipelines? Yes, there are some. Saudi Arabia and the UAE have built pipelines to get oil to ports outside the Gulf. But just look at the numbers.
The total absolute max capacity of those pipelines is about 6.5 million barrels a day. Remember that other number? 21 million? It's just a fraction.
So the bottom line is crystal clear. Even with every single alternative pipeline running at full blast, a complete closure of the strait would cause a huge chunk of the world's oil supply to just disappear. We're talking a potential shortfall of 8 to 10 million barrels every single day. There is no way, none, to make up for that volume.
And all of this leaves us with one last, really critical question to think about. The Strait of Hormuz is just one of several of these choke points. You've got the Suez Canal, the Strait of Malacca, that our entire globalized world relies on. Its vulnerability is just a stark reminder of how fragile our interconnected supply chains really are. Something to think about for sure.